Next, the past year plus has been tough for all of us, but between remote learning, isolation from friends, and a steady stream of bad news, life in the pandemic has been especially hard on kids.
I remember one day, it was this really rainy, kind of depressing looking day. I had tons, like piles on piles of work. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is going to take me 6 days.
Every month in 2020 just seemed to get progressively worse. Like the protests and everything. So it just leaves you feeling super overwhelmed that you don't even have your friends to talk about it with.
That's the focus of a series of new terrific digital discussions called The Pandemic and Kids' Mental Health. Joined now by two of the women behind them, Jeanne Blake, a medical journalist and the president of Blake Works. It's a leadership communication consulting firm. And Dr. Paula Rauch, she's a psychiatrist at Mass General for Kids and the director of MGH's Parenting at a Challenging Time program. Doctor and Jeanne, good to have you here. Thank you both.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Jeanne, if I can start with you, we all know it's been a tough year for kids. Do we actually know how tough, or do we just have anecdotal bad news?
Well, I think that's probably a better question for Dr. Rauch, but I will tell you that in the interviews that I conducted with these young people and many, many more, I heard a consistent message of loss, isolation, despair, and of course, I've kept in touch with a lot of the children, and they say getting back into school is helpful, but they know that there's a tail to this pandemic, and they don't expect a flip a switch and have it be over.
You know, Doctor, most people with whom I've spoken have believed that they can flip a switch, that kids have wanted to get back to school, and the fact that it's actually happening will not quite cause the historical pain to disappear, but mitigate it substantially right away. You don't buy that. You don't believe it's that simple, correct?
No, it's not what we're seeing in the hospital and in our emergency rooms, and it really is not what we would expect from such an intense experience. It's going to take time. There'll be some kids for whom returning to school will be a great relief, but there'll be other children who will find it difficult to be back in the fray. So there'll be lots of different responses, and transitions are always hard.
You know, Jeanne, you do these 3 videos, one for preschoolers, one for preteens, and one for teens. Let's start with the youngest kids for a second. Is there a common thread through the difficulties that toddlers, little tiny kids are encountering throughout this?
Well, we produce these for the parents and all the caring adults in kids' lives. And one thing that I've heard consistently is that parents are really surprised by how much really young children are picking up in the environment around them. Whether the television is on, they're overhearing messages or conversations between parents, and just the tone of parents' voice. They know something is really off.
You know, there's a lot of candor in these videos. I want to play a little. This is Ariel on the difficulties of parenting 2 toddlers during the pandemic. Here she is.
There were nights where I just was not getting any sleep, and I wasn't all that patient. I wasn't all that kind. I wasn't all that loving. There was a moment where I just had to sit with myself and say, okay, this is not working. So my husband and I, we had to sit down and have a conversation. I just was very candid with him. Like, I'm really stressed out with some of the normal expectations that a wife and a mother would have outside of a pandemic. And to have a partner and a support team that believes the same thing has been truly helpful.
And Doctor, I'm assuming what Ariel had to say is not atypical, correct?
No, it's absolutely typical. This has been a difficult time for every family, and individual families have a different set of stressors, but it's been hard for everyone.
And Doctor, preteens, I know it's really hard to generalize, but as best you can, are there common themes that you found with kids in that age group?
Yeah, I think kids rely on their friends for all kinds of learning and support. And so elementary school age children are really missing those activities that the in-person ones in particular that may not be as available to them. And as they're dealing with online learning, the glitches, you would hear from one of the children in one of the videos that there are challenges for the online connections.
You know, Jeanne, are the schools ready for this? I mean, teachers have had to be, and they've always had to be, they have to be shrinks. I hope that term does not offend you, doctor. They have to be shrinks. They have to be teachers. They have to be entertainers. We all know. And then put that on steroids, and they have to learn how to teach kids in a classroom while they're teaching kids at home. Are teachers prepared for the return, the psychological needs of the returns of these kids?
I think that this is really stressing everyone. You know, our materials are being used in schools and being used in corporations, and both are holding what's called these watch parties. Like Dedham Country Day is holding these watch parties, and parents are saying, I thought I was the only one. Teachers are saying similarly that this is, it's a really difficult time. Revere, for example, the city council last night passed a motion to use this in the schools there because Councillor Patrick Keefe heard from a parent that their child is having a really significant time around the emotional stuff of COVID. Now, we know Revere's been hit hard, and the school is doing as much as it can, but the mayor of Revere, Brian Arrigo, said, we just have to stop and measure the impact because it's great, and we've got to figure out how to use the resources to support our schools and support our families in the months and the weeks and the years to come.
Years to come. Doctor, we don't have much time, but I'm assuming, based upon who has taken the brunt of the pain during this year, that kids of color are going to have a particularly hard time. The health impacts of the pandemic, the economic impacts, just go down the list. They've obviously hit those communities far harder. Are there different problems and different fixes, for lack of a better expression, that apply to kids of color?
I think each individual child needs the support of their community. They need the support of their teachers and their parents. It is true that the more layered on stressors are, the more of a challenge that is for children. How children do also depends on how their parents are doing. And in many communities of color, the children and the parents are bearing an unequal amount of stress.
You know, Doctor, I only have a few seconds left. Is it at all helpful in these difficult times to these kids that most of their friends are experiencing something similar? It's not just an individual who's going through a tough time, but virtually everyone around them. Does that help, for lack of a better expression, quickly, if you can?
It helps if you can facilitate the communication so we hear from each other and we build those connections. That's what makes it helpful to have a community that shares a stressor.
Doctor and Jeanne, I really appreciate your time and really appreciate your work, and we'll tell people how they can get the videos in just a couple of minutes. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
For more information on Jeanne's work, head to blakeworks.com.